They bought that in 1944 from a woman named Leon Owens. She had it for, I don't know, quite a few years, her and her husband. And he died, and Leon ran that for another 7 years. And they knew each other, of course, being a small town. So he was able to buy that in 1944. It was 2 miles north of Meeteetse, and sits on the Grable River. It was just a little tiny log house that had been added to several times. And while Leon had it, it was 2 houses in one. She had a hired hand, and he lived in one piece, and she lived in the other. And then they, of course, remodeled when they bought it. So Grandma's kids, the daughters, Pauline and Violet, had a bedroom, and Grandma and Grandpa had a bedroom. And Grandma's dad lived with them for a while too, down there at the ranch. But it's just a conglomeration of parcels that was owned by various different people going clear back to, one of them was Otto Gleaver. He owned it. In fact, his son, and I don't remember his name, had died out of state, and his dad had to petition the state to become his heir so they could take care of the ranch, and then it was sold to different ones. Tyson owned part of it at one time. Bennett's, there's a portion called the Bennett Place, and it was a Bennett Homestead, but that's how he just put it together. He eventually put the Weibel, added the Weibel to it, which was a piece of ground across from the Websters down there where, I don't know who lives there now. I think one of the Amar boys lives there, but it's that field across there that is, just an empty field now. But he added that back in sometime in the 60s, I'd say, late 60s. He started out with Herefords, and then he started mixing in the Black Angus and went to the Black Angus Hereford Cross. And at times he had a few exotics in there. One time they had Brahma, which was not a good mix. They were nasty, mean cows. And then his granddaughter brought up a Longhorn bull. So we had Longhorns in there for a long time, which was great because they were good mothers and easy calvers, And he also had sheep, until, I don't know, when he finally got rid of them. The coyotes got so thick that they were eating more sheep than he could sell, so they got rid of them. And he was getting older too, but he was still working there. We all helped. The whole family were always down there working, so. Rarely he had hired hands. He hired extra people during hunting season. And I don't know if you ever heard of Henry Weller. He was a Meeteetse's own. And he would go down and Grandpa would have him work for him, building stackyards or fencing and little jobs like that. Especially in the fall when he was getting ready to go hunting. Well, on the ranch, I saw it go from horse-drawn equipment to tractors. I was the last kid to drive the team. We had a team of horses and we were feeding with them. We used to run the buck rate with them. He asked me that day, and I wasn't very old. I was probably 6, 7 years old, and he said, "Do you want to drive the team to the barn?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "This is the last time that we worked." And he took the harness off and hung it on the wall, and that was the last time we had a team. And then, from a 52 Ford truck to a 72 Ford truck. So yeah, there were some changes. My granddad was very old-fashioned, and he did look to the future, but yet he didn't. He was one of the only guys in the valley back in the 20s that tried to convince all these ranchers that they should vaccinate for blackleg. Now, where he had found out about this vaccine, I have no idea. But they had several meetings here in town, and he was the one that literally convinced them that you need to vaccinate for blackleg or you're going to lose your cattle. And so that was quite an accomplishment for him. But yet, on his house down there, just before oh gosh, it must have been, well, he died in 94, so it was about 92. I was patching the roof on his house. And I said, Grandpa, you know, you really need to have this house re-roofed. Well, we just did. I said, yeah, 1944. Oh, has it been that long? Well, of course. But the lady that he bought it from, Leon Owens, when we sold the ranch, we had a sale and we were cleaning out all the buildings. In the old garage were box after box after box of things that Leon's gonna come and get one day. And she had been dead for many years when we sold the ranch. She was a school teacher and there's old books and all of this stuff. Us kids, you don't mess with that, that's Leon, she's gonna come get it.
Mhm.
You know, she was quite a character too, but yeah, she, you know, so yeah, he was forward thinking, but kind of backward, you know. My grandmother was the greatest thing in the world. She was the first white girl born on the Crow Reservation in Hardin, Montana. And they moved down when she was just a young girl. Her folks came down Homestead on Meeteetse Creek, I think. I'm not sure now.
What were her parents named? Do you know?
My grandmother's parents,
Mm-hmm.
her dad's name was Holbert Smith, and her mother's name was Estella, and her maiden name was Clausen. But they, my gran was just a heck of a lady. You know, she, in a crowd of people, she never talked much, but she always listened. But she was my champion all my life. We just clicked, and she was tough on you if she had to be, you know. But she loved her family and loved to feed people, and you didn't go to her house but what you didn't eat something. And if you're in the middle of dinner and you show up, you're going to have a seat at the table, whether you just got done eating or not, you know. And that was the way she shared her love, you know. And when he worked for the Pitchfork all those years, she cooked, you know. And they were down at the TL for years when the Pitchfork was, the TL was part of the Pitchfork, and she was the cook, and their dad was the gardener down there and the chore boy, and God, she cooked for all those men. 25 cents a meal is what she made. And they even had to produce, I mean, the ranch produced the meat, you know, provided meat, potatoes, dairy, they had milk cows and stuff. But you know, she had to provide a certain amount of it, you know, and canned all kinds of stuff. My God, they canned a lot of food, and that was just the way you lived in those days, you know. He was an outfitter. He'd been outfitting since 1948. His son-in-law and my dad's brother kind of started a little outfitting business, and then Grandpa fell in with them one way or another. I don't know how the three of them all got together. But anyway, they did that. Grandpa ended up doing it. The son-in-law, he went on to different things. And my uncle moved to Pinedale, and my dad stayed here. And so that's how I ended up in Meeteetse. But he outfitted until he couldn't do it any longer. He sold the outfitting business, the hunting camps, in 1983, I believe it was. And that was part of the homestead. He bought that in 1958. We had gone up and he'd always known it was there. And we'd gone up in 1957, fall of 57, to look at it. And he decided that he thought that would make a good base camp for his hunting business. At that time, he had a base camp in Franks Fork. And they would go from Franks Fork over into Red Creek with the horse. You know, they have to pack into Red Creek, and that's where they hunted out of. But he was able to buy Anderson and Elmer Creek camps. And I don't remember who owned those. It seems to me Bert Avery might have had something to do with those at that time, but I don't remember. then he made the deal and was able to buy it. And so they started organizing it the spring of '58 to clean it up and everything. A porcupine had gotten in there. It had been open, and nobody really bothered it or anything, but Elmer Berquist built it. In the 30s, and I think from 30 on up to, I think he died in 33. But he had pneumonia. They'd gone swimming in the creek down below, and he got pneumonia and died that fall. But this porcupine got in there, and the door evidently blew shut. And Berquist had made furniture like the Molesworth, only he had used rawhide to cover the chairs. And that porcupine lived on that rawhide until he died of lack of water, I guess, or who knows what. But he was dead in a big heap in the middle of the dining room when we bought it, or he bought it. But we spent a lot of years up there, a lot of summer, a lot of fun times.
Mm-hmm.
But it had been sold. Mrs. Berquist had sold it, and I don't remember the man's name. But I think it was in a kind of like a trust or something, and he had gone through a lawyer in Cody. And I just don't know who that was. I started up there when I was just a kid going with him. I never played football because hunting season was in the fall of the year, and we were up there with them hunting, guiding. And as soon as I was old enough to have a guide license, I had one and guided for him off and on until he sold the place. My dad and my folks, they went up. Mom would cook and Dad would guide, and they had the 2 camps there, and it really was a family affair. You got your hunters out there, and you get them on a hillside and wait and see what comes along, and meet people from all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. Armstrongs, Merlin Stewart Armstrong, they were outfitters at the same time. And they were over the hill from Anderson Creek on Stewart Creek. And so you'd run into them occasionally. Towards the end, in the late 70s, a lot of people had found our little paradise. And because up until then, it was just the outfitters up there. You rarely saw anybody up just hunting for themselves, Yeah, it was kind of a word of mouth thing that started out, You have a lot of repeat customers. There were 2 couples from Florida that came out 20 some years in a row, and to be very honest with you, my granddad was really kind of low on his charges. He was the cheapest outfitter in the valley, and so he really barely made it. He would always break even and usually have a little left over. And we couldn't get him to raise his prices. It was competitive with everybody else. And he says, "Oh no, can't do that," and he never would, Like I said, people from New York, Florida, Virginia, California, just all over the country. We had one guy up there one year. His name was Scooty Hampton, and he was the vice president of J.R. Reynolds Tobacco Company. This man had more money than you could shake a stick at. And somehow he had gotten word that during this trip that his rifle collection had been stolen while he was on this trip. And he said, I said, "Well, that's really terrible. That's a great loss." He said, "No worry, I'll replace it when I get home. I'll just buy another one." And he was very wealthy. Some of the guys that, like him, he tipped my grandparents really well, which they deserved, But it was, you're cooking on a wood stove, and your body's in a teepee out in the brush, and it's very, very rustic, I look at some of the hunting camps today you see on videos, and it's like, wow, we never had it that cool, But we hauled a lot of wood and drug it in and cut wood, by hand. You couldn't use a chainsaw, it all had to be by hand. And then we'd split it. my grandmother would cook. I mean, she's the best cook in the world up there. You know, she'd bake biscuits for breakfast, and I mean, gourmet eating, is what it was. We had some hunters out that had become really good friends with my folks and my grandparents, and they brought their son out one time. It's been some ago, I don't remember his name, but he was having issues, with his life, mental issues, and come to find out later, he was, until he got there, was on the verge of suicide. And that trip that he spent out there with us, and the time that I spent with him, he turned completely around, and last I knew, he was doing great, But yeah, and we had people, one guy that would come out from Wisconsin, he was a father of 13. He wanted to kill an elk just for meat. So we got out there, and this one morning, and here came this big old bull elk, and he shot him. They went in the Boone and Crockett records. It was huge. I think it was 400 and some points. Huge. Never in my life will I ever get another elk like that, he said. So he came out hunting the next year, and damn if he didn't get the same thing. Killed another great big bull. He said, and that bull was so tough you couldn't even get a fork in the gravy, but he said, I got it, and I said, out of the deal anyway. The hunting camps were sold to Jay Clark, and they were on Elmer Creek and Anderson Creek. And according to the Wyoming outfitters, I don't know if it was through the Game and Fish or what, but he had to sell so many horses and so many tents, so much gear with each camp so they could continue on. He didn't sell everything to Jake because he had an auction the next year and sold all the rest of the tents and horses and tack and stuff.